The sun was already sinking when they dragged her out past the cattle fence, half-conscious, bruised, and barefoot. Dust clung to her torn dress. Her lip bled as she clutched the locket they hadn't noticed, the one he gave her. They laughed. When they left her by the ravine, said the mute cowboy wouldn't care. But just before night swallowed the land, a shadow appeared on the ridge. Broad shoulders, a wide-brimmed hat, and those same quiet eyes that had watched everything, said nothing, and remembered everything. He dismounted without a word. She looked up through cracked lips. "You came back," she whispered. And in the silence, she cried, "Before we jump back in, introduce yourself and let me know where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you even a little, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special just for you now." Let's go back to the first time she ever saw him, dusty boots, wounded eyes and all. The wind always felt harsher on the edge of Hollow Creek. It howled through the slats of the broken church, tossed dust across the porch of the shuttered general store, and scraped at the bones of anyone foolish enough to stay too long. But she stayed. Not because she wanted to, but because there was nowhere else. Hollow Creek wasn't always like this. There used to be music at the saloon on Fridays. There used to be candles glowing in the windows and children playing under the cottonwood trees. But fires don't burn forever, and sometimes the brightest flames leave the darkest ash. Everyone knew her as Mara Lynn, the ranch girl with the limp. The scar just below her jaw caught sunlight like a flash of silver when she tilted her head. No one ever asked where it came from. No one dared, but everyone whispered. She wasn't born here. She came on the last eastbound train 5 years ago, wearing a black dress too elegant for a town like this, and a wedding ring too new for someone already widowed. That's what the butcher's wife said anyway. The sheriff's boy claimed she was deaf in one ear. Someone else said she was the preacher's runaway daughter. A few of the older men reckoned she was hiding something shameful. But no one asked her. Not really. They just watched her limp through town every morning with a quiet nod. She never smiled back. Just tipped her hat low and kept walking, boot dragging slightly in the dust. Her voice when she used it was soft and low, the kind that made folks lean in to hear, and then wonder if they'd imagined it afterward. She lived out past the abandoned rail line, in a half-collapsed ranch, house that creaked every time the wind changed. The only things that kept her company were the horses, 2 of them, old, loyal, and just as haunted as she was. She fed them before herself, spoke to them more than she ever spoke to people. Sometimes, when the town was quiet and the moon was full, you could hear her playing a lullaby on a harmonica, faint, fragile, like it might break apart if you got too close. No one ever got close. Before we dive deeper into the story, just a quick note. I'm Thomas, the voice behind this narration. If you enjoy how it sounds, let me know in the comments so we can keep the same voice in future videos. Life moved slowly in Hollow Creek, the kind of slow where folks remembered everything. They remembered the day she screamed at the mayor's son when he cornered her by the well. They remembered how she stopped going to church after that. They remembered the bruises, the silence, the tear in her sleeve. But memory in Hollow Creek wasn't a lifeline. It was a rope, and most people used it to hang others. She wasn't invited to socials. Her name was never pulled at raffles. The dress shop refused to mend her things, and the schoolteacher politely ignored her when she brought apples from her ranch. Kids were told not to stare, but they always did, especially at the limp. Mara learned to walk with her eyes down, shoulders tucked in. She learned to keep to herself. She didn't cry, not where anyone could see. Still, there were moments when her mask cracked, like the time she lingered too long at the old train station, staring at the rusted tracks like she was waiting for something, someone. Or the way she would stop in front of the mirror, brushing her fingertips over the scar, trying to remember if it had always been that deep. Or the way she would press a hand to her belly at night, eyes shut tight, whispering something that no one ever heard. She wasn't cruel, just distant, like her heart had packed up and left, and her body hadn't realized it yet. And then he came. the silent cowboy. He rode into Hollow Creek on a storm-colored stallion, dust-covered, coat torn at the shoulder, hat low over his face. He didn't say a word, didn't need to. People felt his presence before they saw him. He tied his horse outside the tavern and went in, ordered a drink with a nod, paid with coins that looked older than the town. And when he turned, Mara was already staring. Something in his eyes struck her like lightning, calm, cold, unshaken, a mirror of her own. They were both ghosts, just breathing. She turned away first. Of course she did. She wasn't the kind of girl cowboys stayed for. And that's where our story really begins. Not with love, not with fate, but with two broken souls, passing each other in silence, one running from the world, the other from himself. The stranger didn't leave. That was the first thing people noticed. Most men who rode into Hollow Creek were gone by morning, chasing the next job, the next card game, the next woman. But this one? He stayed, checked into the boarding house with just a single bag and no last name, paid in cash, slept with the window open even when the wind turned cold. No one asked his business, but everyone watched him, especially Mara. She first saw him again 3 mornings later, just before dawn. She was in town early, trading eggs for flour, when she spotted him sitting outside the smithy sharpening a knife. His coat hung loose on his shoulders, and the rising light caught the curve of an old scar across his knuckles. She hesitated. Just for a second, he looked up. Their eyes met. He didn't smile, didn't nod, but he didn't look away either. She blinked first. Again. Later that day, he came by her ranch, didn't say why, didn't ask permission, just walked the fence line, boots crunching in the dry grass, pausing now and then to press against the boards and check the strength. She watched from the porch, heart ticking like a warning bell. When he finally turned toward her, she stood straighter, ready, guarded. "You've got a broken slat," he said, voice low and rough like gravel. "South end. Something's been leaning on it." It was the first time he'd spoken to her. She didn't answer, just nodded slowly. He tipped his hat and walked off, boots trailing dust. That night, she fixed the slat, but she couldn't sleep. The next few days came with whispers. Why's he still here? He ain't working for the ranchers. Maybe he's got a bounty on him. Maybe she hired him. Her? She barely feeds herself. But no one asked him directly, and no one dared ask her. Still, the stranger's presence stirred the town like a breeze before a storm. The men grew quieter, the women watched closer, and Mara. She kept catching herself staring down the road, waiting. One morning, she found a fresh stack of firewood by her door. Another, she found her well bucket retied with new rope. No notes, no words, just signs. They didn't talk often, but when they did, the words seemed to echo longer than they should. Once, she offered him coffee. He took it, sat 3 feet from her on the porch, and said nothing for nearly an hour. The silence was comfortable, unusual for her. Usually silence was a punishment. But with him it felt like an understanding. He asked once about the limp. She said, "Horse fell." He nodded. Didn't press. She asked once about the knife scar. He said, "Someone tried to take something that wasn't theirs." She nodded. Didn't press, but it was a look, not words, that changed everything. One afternoon she was at the creek pulling water when she slipped. Mud gave way under her boot, and she hit the bank hard. Not a scream, just a sharp hiss through her teeth. And then he was there, out of nowhere, pulling her up, hands strong but careful. For a second their faces were inches apart, and he looked at her like she wasn't broken, like he saw through the limp and the scar in the past, like maybe he saw the girl who still played lullabies under the moonlight. She looked away. He let go, but something had shifted. The change didn't go unnoticed. That evening, the tavern got louder, the stares longer. The mayor's son, Clayton Harlow, watched the cowboy with the expression of a man whose pride had been scratched. He swaggered up to Mara the next day in town, tipped his hat and said, "Funny how quick you forget. Who helped you when you first came here?" She kept walking. He grabbed her wrist. Before she could even flinch, a shadow fell over them. The cowboy. Clayton straightened. "This ain't your concern, stranger." The cowboy's voice was calm. "You're right. It's hers." Clayton scowled, looked at Mara, then back at him. "She's trouble. You'll learn that soon enough." He walked off. And Mara just stood there, stunned. No one had stood up for her in years. Not since. She swallowed hard. "Thank you," she whispered. The cowboy didn't answer, just nodded and walked with her to the edge of town. From that day forward, they were seen together more, never holding hands, never close enough to call it courting, but always nearby, always in the same frame. He helped her mend the barn roof. She brought him wildflowers once, said nothing as she left them on the gatepost. When he got sick, just a fever, she sat beside him all night with a cool cloth on his head, humming that same broken lullaby. When she cried, he didn't speak, just held her hand until the shaking stopped, and slowly the silence between them stopped meaning nothing. It started meaning everything. But Hollow Creek was not a kind town, and quiet love rarely stays quiet for long. One night, someone rode out to her ranch and cut the horses loose, slashed the fences, left a dead rabbit nailed to her door. No name. No threat. Just a message. She didn't cry, just stared at the blood-soaked wood and clenched her jaw. He arrived minutes later, like he'd already known. He didn't say anything, just began fixing the fence with shaking hands. Later, she brought him a lantern and set it beside him. "You don't have to stay," she said, voice barely a whisper. "You don't owe me." He looked up. The lantern light danced in his eyes, and for the first time he looked afraid. "Neither do you," he said. "But you're still here." And she realized something then. He wasn't staying because she needed saving. He was staying because he did too. It happened on a Sunday. Church bells rang hollow over Hollow Creek as the town gathered for the annual harvest celebration. A time of food, forced smiles, and pretending the land was kinder than it really was. Mara hadn't planned to go. She never did. But he asked her to walk with him, just for a while. "They can't hurt what they don't understand," he said. "But sometimes they stare less if you show up anyway." She didn't know what surprised her more, that he said so many words, or that she believed them. So she came. Wore her best coat, pinned her braid back, and walked beside him through the town square, as if the wind wasn't trying to knock her sideways with every step. For a few moments it felt almost normal. Children ran past, music played faintly from a fiddle. The air carried the scent of spiced apples and hay. Then came Clayton Harlow. He stood by the pie stand, beer in hand, lips curled into a smirk that always meant trouble. A small crowd gathered, folks who smiled too tightly and whispered too much. "Didn't expect to see her here," Clayton said loudly, eyes scanning Mara like she was livestock. "Guess anyone can show their face these days, even if they ain't earned it." She stiffened. The cowboy beside her didn't move. Clayton took a step closer. "Tell me, Mara, how's the limp these days? Still dragging that leg like it's filled with sin?" The crowd laughed. Not all of them, but enough. She turned to leave, cheeks burning, throat tight. That's when Clayton reached into his coat and pulled out a torn letter. Her letter, one she had written and never sent, addressed to her dead husband. A prayer, a confession. He read it aloud, word for word. She stood frozen. The cowboy's jaw flexed, but she grabbed his arm, shook her head. Not here. Not now. She ran. By the time she reached her ranch, the sun was already falling. She slammed the door behind her, shaking, heart splitting in two. That letter was hidden in her barn. No one should have found it. No one should have known. She didn't light a lamp, just sat on the floor, legs pulled to her chest. She hated Hollow Creek, hated every sideways glance, every half-truth. Every time someone decided she was less, And worst of all, she hated herself for believing she could have something different. Something warm. Something like him. She packed a small bag before midnight, left the note on the table. 3 words. Don't come looking. Then she was gone. The snow had arrived early that year. By dawn, her boots were soaked. Her hands, numb. But she kept walking, following the creek through the woods, deeper than she'd ever dared. Somewhere past mile marker 6, her knee gave out. The limp she'd hidden so well screamed back to life. She stumbled, tried to push forward, then fell, face first into the snow. The silence of the forest swallowed her up. And in that quiet, she cried. Not loud, not ugly, just soft sobs into white earth, like the snow might forgive her for being tired. She thought of her mother's voice, her husband's hands, the way the cowboy's eyes never looked away from her scar. Maybe no one would find her out here. Maybe that was okay. He didn't knock, didn't shout her name through the trees. He just sat beside her in the snow like it was the most natural thing in the world. She didn't open her eyes, didn't ask how he found her, but when she felt his coat slip over her shoulders and his gloved hand wrap around hers, she exhaled. Didn't you get the note? She whispered, voice raw. I did, he said. Then why are you here? Because you asked me not to come looking. You never said anything about not finding you. She laughed then, a bitter, breathless sound. He didn't smile, just waited, until she leaned her head against his shoulder and he let her. Back at the ranch, he didn't talk much, didn't offer comfort she hadn't asked for. He just stayed, chopped wood, fed the horses, fixed the broken door without a word. That night she found him outside by the fence sharpening his knife again under the stars. Why do you do that? She asked. He glanced up. Because it reminds me that I can still fix something, small, even when everything else feels too big. She stood there for a long moment, then sat beside him. No words, just stars, wind, and breath. A week passed before she asked the question that had been clawing at her ribs. Why me? He didn't pretend not to understand. Because I've seen pain that makes people cruel, but yours didn't. She shook her head. You don't know what I've done, what I lost. You don't know what I've carried, he replied, voice low. And for the first time she saw it, the cracks in him, the ghosts behind his quiet eyes. He wasn't there to save her. He was there because he knew what it meant to stand at the edge of something dark and choose to keep standing anyway. The town never apologized. They never do. But something changed when the saloon doors swung open a month later and the two of them walked in together, heads high, hands not touching but close enough that no one missed the meaning. Clayton looked away. The whispers died faster this time, and when Mara ordered a drink and the cowboy nodded toward her before taking his own, no one laughed, because you can't laugh at someone who survived, especially not when someone stands beside her and says nothing, because nothing says more than showing up when it counts. Winter didn't ease out of Hollow Creek. It clawed and howled its way through, marched like it had a score to settle. But on the ridge above Mara's land, where the wind struck hardest and the snow piled deep, 2 people worked with the steady grit of those who had been broken and chose to mend. Each morning, the cowboy saddled the mule. Each night, Mara lit the fire. They built a fence first, 12 acres of barbed wire and stubborn posts. Then came the stalls, 3 bays, one already filled with a rescued mare the cowboy had found limping by the riverbed. She's skittish, he said when he brought her in. So was I, Mara replied, brushing the mare's tangled mane. The horse ranch came together not with money, but with time, with bruised hands, frostbitten fingers, and borrowed lumber from neighbors who pretended not to see, but dropped off planks all the same. Mara had never worked harder, never felt more alive. She started walking straighter, laughing more. Once, she caught herself humming in the garden and stopped, startled by the sound of her own joy. The town still watched. It always would. But when her tomatoes began to grow and folks lined up for eggs and milk at her stall, they stopped sneering long enough to nod. A few even paid with respect in their eyes. And the law? Sheriff Harland, who once ignored Clayton's cruelty, now tipped his hat when they crossed paths. "Looks like you're doing all right," he said one afternoon outside the feed store. "I am," Mara answered. The cowboy said nothing, but his hand settled lightly at the small of her back. Harlan noticed. And so did Clayton, watching from across the street with a bitter mouth and restless eyes. One night, the wind turned warm for the first time in months. They sat on the porch, boots off, whiskey between them. "You ever gonna tell me why you don't talk much?" Mara asked, half smiling. He shrugged. "Did enough talking once. Cost me everything." She waited, and for the first time, he let the story come. He'd been a deputy once, in a town 2 counties south. Trusted, respected, engaged to a woman, with a laugh like thunder, until one night he arrested the wrong man. A drifter accused of robbing the mayor's store. Turned out the mayor's son did it, but by then, the drifter was dead, hung by a mob the cowboy couldn't stop. So he left, resigned his badge, buried his voice with the man he couldn't save, and rode north with nothing but shame in his saddlebag. Mara didn't speak for a long time. Then she reached across the whiskey bottle and touched his hand. "We're more than what we couldn't stop," she whispered. "We're what we do now." The next morning the barn was burning, not smoldering, roaring. Flames licked the sky, horses screamed, smoke tore through the valley. They ran barefoot, shouting, grabbing buckets, coughing hard enough to bleed. The mayor got out. The chickens didn't. By noon, it was ash. The sheriff arrived by dusk. So did most of the town. No one spoke, not at first. Then one boy stepped forward. Johnny, the Harlow kid. "I saw my brother leave your barn late last night," he said, voice trembling. "Said he was just looking around, but he had matches." Sheriff Harlan clenched his jaw. "Where is he now?" "Gone." Took Pa's rifle. "Headed west, I think." The cowboy's eyes narrowed, not in rage, but in something colder, like calculation. That night Mara cried again, but it wasn't like before. These tears had heat, rage, fight. "They want to burn us out?" she spat, pacing. "Let them try. I'll rebuild the damn barn with my own blood if I have to." The cowboy stood steady. "We will," he said. "Together." And they did. The town came through this time. Even those who had once whispered offered help. Someone lent them a hammer. Someone else brought nails. A girl gave them a newborn chick she'd raised from hatching. "For luck," she said. And Mara, who had once been a shadow in the back of the room, stood tall at the front, hammer in hand, directing the rebuild like a general at war. The fire hadn't broken her. It had forged her. But peace never stays. Long in places like Hollow Creek, not when ghosts still ride behind you. One morning, a rider came into town. Dusty coat. Shotgun. The way he looked at the cowboy said everything. "Name's Ellis Granger," he said to Harland. "That man you're protecting killed my brother." Harland looked over at the cowboy, then back at Ellis. "Your brother was hanged for robbery. He was innocent." "So was the deputy who tried to stop the mob," Harland replied evenly. Granger spit into the dirt. "Don't matter. I came for justice." Mara stepped forward. "If you want blood," she said, eyes sharp, "you'll have to take it from both of us." Granger raised his brow. "You his wife?" "Not yet." "But you will be?" She looked at the cowboy. He didn't flinch. Didn't smile. But he nodded just once. "Yes," she said. "I will be." The duel never came. Granger saw something in their stance, something tired, strong, and too bound together to break. He left, but not before saying, "He ain't the only one with old debts. Don't be surprised if someone else comes looking." They weren't. By spring, the barn stood taller than before. The ranch had a name now, Second Wind. The mare had 2 foals. Mara wore her hair loose more often. The scar didn't fade, but it didn't have to. It was part of her story. And the cowboy? He spoke more now. Not a lot. Just enough. One night, as lightning split the horizon and rain tapped the windows, he whispered, "I didn't save you. You saved yourself." She turned to him, smiling in the dark. "No," she said. "We did." It was a clear morning when the letter came. Mara found it folded under a stone on the porch. No name, no return address. Just a slip of paper scrawled, "With you trial 2 weeks, county seat, you'll need to testify." The cowboy read it once and folded it slow. His jaw worked tight, but his eyes didn't waver. He was being called to answer for what happened all those years ago, back in Red Ridge, where the mob had hung a drifter on his watch. A new sheriff there was digging up old bones. Maybe to make a name. Maybe to make it right. "They'll want to make me wear the blame," he said, voice dry. "Might jail me. Might worse." Mara didn't flinch. She stared at the barn they'd built, the hills they'd worked, and then up at him. "Will you go?" "I have to." Silence settled heavy between them, thicker than grief, heavier than guilt. Then she said, "Then I'm going too." He looked at her, like she was the only clear thing in the whole world. "You don't have to." "I know." The day before, they were set to leave. Hollow Creek held its spring fair. The sky was dusted with clouds, the air ripe with cornbread and laughter. Kids ran wild through hay bales, and fiddlers played like the world had no past. Mara almost stayed home, but something pulled her there. Maybe it was the memory of silence. Maybe it was the need to prove she wasn't afraid anymore. So she went, in a blue cotton dress, with her scar unhidden and her head high. They whispered. Of course they did. That's Mara Harper, the widow. That's her cowboy, the quiet one, the ex-deputy, the fire survivor. But this time she didn't hear shame in it. She heard respect. Then, near the auction tent, someone called out, "Miss Harper?" She turned. It was the mayor's wife, a stiff woman with lace gloves and a voice like tea gone cold. "I heard you and your gentleman are leaving town." "We'll be back," Mara replied. The woman hesitated, then offered a small, wrinkled smile. "I hope so." By evening, the music slowed. Lanterns flickered. The town gathered around the bonfire, and that's when he did it. The cowboy stepped forward, into the glow of the flames, and reached for Mara's hand. The crowd hushed. He didn't raise his voice, didn't give a speech, just said, "This woman saved my soul. She gave me a home when I thought I didn't deserve one, and if I come back from this, I'd like to marry her." Gasps, murmurs, then silence again, until Mara looked at him and said, steady as rain, "If you don't come back, I'll ride. After you, so you'd better." They left Hollow Creek at dawn, 2 horses, 1 trail. The town watched. Some waved, some didn't, but no one whispered anymore. The trial in Red Ridge was hard. Testimonies, old names, bitter faces. The brother of the hanged drifter spoke with tears and rage, but Mara stood and told them everything. How he'd tried to stop the mob, how he'd held the rope after it snapped, how he'd buried the man himself. The courtroom was still when she finished. "I've seen cowards," she said. "He's not one, and if you send him away for doing less than nothing, then shame on you." In the end, the judge cleared his name. Too little, too late, but just enough. They came back to Hollow Creek on a rainy Wednesday. No parade, just a porch. Light left on, and a new foal born the morning they returned. Life didn't stop for anyone, not even those who earned a second chance. 3 months later, they married under the stars. No church. No veil, just her in her boots and him in his best shirt, holding hands in front of the rebuilt barn with the whole town watching. Even Sheriff Harland cried. Quietly, behind his hat. Mara didn't speak vows, neither did he. They just looked at each other like they already knew. Years passed. Second wind. Ranch grew. Kids came to ride, to learn, to listen. Sometimes strangers passed through, chasing peace or ghosts. The cowboy took them in. Mara fed them. No one ever left hungry. They never had children of their own. But one winter, they found a baby left in a basket at their gate, a note pinned to the blanket. "Name her Hope. She's yours now," and he So they did. Hope Harper. She grew up with her mother's grit, her father's eyes, and a smile that healed strangers. Some nights, long after the fires burned low, Mara sat on the porch beside her husband. She'd lean her head on his shoulder and say, "I wonder if they still talk about us." And he'd reply, with that low, quiet voice, "Let them. We got better things to do." And they did.